Lydia,
Yes, Joe.
have you recovered from Oktoberfest?
Yeah, I've made it. I made it
Did
through.
you drink plenty of beers? Did you eat enough schnitzels?
I did.
Good for
I
you.
had my fill of schnitzels.
Well, we are at the height of fall season. We are at the height of pumpkin season. We are at the height of many seasons, believe it or not. And just like we've done before, we're going to take a break here to talk about what's in season in St. Louis.
Are we falling for flavors?
Oh, we are falling for flavors right now because we're kind of in that transition period. We've wrapped up. We've put tomatoes to bed. We've put zucchinis to bed. Your garden is going to sleep. We've kind of crossed off those traditional garden things that you think of when you think of fresh produce, but there are still ample opportunities for you to build in really great flavors using things that are locally grown, using things that are fresh ingredients, using things that are at the height of their season right now in St. Louis or around St. Louis. And we're going to talk about some of those, where to get them, how to use them, and, and even some of the things that we don't like, because you know what? That's how it works sometimes.
Just newsflash, you're probably going to hear a lot of hatred for pumpkin spice from Joe.
We get
Just
it.
going to forewarn you.
We get it.
But hey, great news. It's going to be October and pumpkin spice season is over, right? It ends in the middle of September. It starts in August, it ends in September. So now we're in this like warming spices. We've got cinnamon, we've got nutmeg, we've got cloves. We've got some really great flavors happening. So I think let's dive into it. Let's fall into it.
Let's fall. We
into it.
dove into Oktoberfest. Let's fall into fall flavors.
This is what happens, right? Like we fall back because of daylight savings time.
Oh, we still got a few more weeks till that, so we're
All
good.
right.
We partied so hard, we got to fall into bed.
I could use an extra
Let's
hour in
fall
my
into
life.
Fall flavors.
Well, let's do it. Okay. What are your favorite fall flavors?
So I'm going to start off, my king, when I get to fall and I think of the things that I want to cook with in fall, and the things that I've saved and I've harvested from my garden. At this point last year, I literally had like 30 of them saved in a cupboard in my kitchen. And that was butternut squash. This is the peak time to use butternut squash. And when we were planning this podcast, Lydia laid down a list of like 20 different things that were in season of all this stuff. And I was like, where's my butternut squash?
It's under the umbrella of squash.
But there's not even on here.
But listen, in Joe's defense, butternut squash is probably the king of all squashes, right?
Yes.
It's that
royal.
big, huge, massive squash that you can't miss when you're in the grocery store. It can be a little cumbersome to peel. It can be cumbersome to prepare, but it does have an amazing flavor to it.
And what's nice now is that, like, many grocery stores will sell in the produce section pre-diced butternut squash. It works. It's easy.
amazing.
If someone was like, hey, I'll give you $3 to dice this butternut squash, I'd be like, heck no. So that's why it's worth it to me to buy it pre-diced sometimes.
But here's a trick, right? I'm going to share a little trick with it. If you're roasting your butternut squash, right, you don't have to peel it to roast it. You can just cut it in half.
Okay.
You're just going to put a little olive oil, salt, and pepper, put it cut side down, roast it so that outside skin will kind of help protect it from getting crispy. And then all you do is you just scoop it out because that skin that's on there will kind of act as a shell. And you don't have to go through all of the hassle of slicing and dicing that thick skin off your butternut.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, problem solved.
Nice tip if you need pureed butternut squash.
Yes,
or
if you're making
if you're making a soup or a butternut squash bisque or butternut squash ravioli with brown butter and sage.
Oh, you're talking my language.
God. So my two go-to recipes when I'm using butternut squash, which I'm doing right now, are two things. One is to just take butternut squash and cube it and saute it with pancetta, so diced up pancetta, shallots, and fresh sage. Toss that all together, saute it, garlic, salt, pepper, all of those things, maybe a squirt of some lemon juice to get some acid in there. and maybe like a half tablespoon of brown sugar, just like a little extra sweetness to toss that in there. And then I'll toss that with some fresh pasta. It's so good. I'll just serve that as a side dish at Thanksgiving sometimes. But I love that combination of sage, pancetta, and butternut squash. It works so incredibly well together. Butternut squash goes really, really well in breakfast burritos. I love doing it in breakfast burritos with spinach, spicy sausage, red peppers. Makes a really, really good breakfast burrito. Gives it a nice healthy kick. It's a good starch replacement in a breakfast burrito for potatoes. Super yummy.
So is this what you do with your leftover butternut squash? Put it in a burrito, right?
I will make butternut squash just for the burritos. Like, I will buy butternut squash knowing that I'm making breakfast burritos, and then I will freeze them. So I'll buy big tortillas and then make 8 to 10 breakfast burritos, wrap them individually, put them in the freezer, and then grab one on the way out the door, zap it when I get to work, and I've got a somewhat healthy breakfast burrito. Super yummy. My last go-to, and it's a huge crowd pleaser, and actually, when I made it, I got second place in the Public Media Chili Cook-Off in 2019.
Ooh, that sounds like a big thing.
When it was 9 PBS versus St. Louis Public Radio. That's right. Second place in the non-traditional chili category. That's right. I have a medal upstairs. I'll post it as a part of this blog. And it was a butternut squash chipotle turkey chili. So easy, super duper yummy. I will put the recipe online as well, but literally it's cans of stuff and black beans, ground turkey, chopped butternut squash, and let it simmer for multiple hours. And it's sweet but spicy, but a little healthy because of the butternut squash and turkey as opposed to real meaty. But really flavorful, really easy, and also my kids like it.
Do you know that you can make a butternut squash broth? Did you know that?
Really?
Yes. So Cooks Illustrated actually has a recipe for a butternut squash white bean soup with a sage pesto on top of it. So ideally, you take half of your amount of butternut squash that you would have. You let it simmer in water, a little bit of butter, and you could put some Parmesan rinds in there if you wanted to kind of add some really beautiful nuttiness and creaminess. But ideally, you let that sit and then you puree it. So you have this really delicious, full body broth. And then you put your beans in there. You could put some protein if you wanted to. So bacon would be great. Pancetta would be wonderful. And then the big key to it all that brings it all together is the walnut sage pesto that you would put on top to kind of help blend all those flavors together.
Yum.
So, yeah.
I love that.
Just scouting it out because it is kind of soup season. So I am in love with soup. It's my go-to. There's always some on hand. And with the soups in this season, one thing that I always add to my soups to kind of help add a little extra, nutrients is kale, right? Kale is in season. It's a autumn to winter sort of green. But newsflash, it's actually not a lettuce. It's part of the broccoli family. Did you know that?
I did not.
Yes. But the thing is that not a lot of people really enjoy kale the way that they should because kale can be tough. It can be bitter. Sometimes it doesn't add maybe the texture that you want. So one way around that is to add a little extra salt. So salt your kale like you should salt your lettuce, but that salt helps to tenderize it, but also
Did you just say salt your lettuce?
Salt your lettuce. Salt your salads. Here's what I'm going to tell you what happens. Salt. Newsflash, this is a little nerd alert. Salt is a chemical reaction when we add it to food. And so what it does to lettuce, what it does to your vegetables, what it's going to do to the kale is it's going to tenderize it, but it's also going to take out whatever bitterness is in it as well. Okay? So with that, when you salt your kale, let it sit for about 20, 30 minutes, and it will tenderize your kale. So it's not so chewy, but it'll also take out some of that bitterness that is stored within. So it makes it super yummy, makes it perfect. The other one that I love is beets. I love me some beets. I love beets on everything. They're so good.
Now, how do you prepare a beet? Because I've eaten beets at restaurants.
Yeah.
And I feel like the beet that I would buy at the grocery store is nothing compared to the beet that is served at a restaurant.
Yes.
Like what is that process? I'm sure it's a fairly easy thing to do because it's a beet.
Right. So, well, beets kind of get a bad rap because they can be really earthy, right? Or like my son says, they taste like dirt.
Yes.
So, the way that you prepare them is also really, really important. So, what I like to do when I make beets is I'll actually create an aluminum foil boat, and I'll put in the bottom of it a little bit of water, a splash of vinegar, because that acid kind of helps take out some of that earthiness to it. But I'll steam it in the oven or roast it in the oven so those natural sugars get to caramelize. It has a moment to kind of steam. So that's one way, is to roast or steam your beets. I've seen people boil them. It's not something I would recommend, because when you are thinking about the cooking vessels that you're putting things in, and when you boil your beets, you're using water, and that dilutes the flavor. It also makes it take out some of the nutrients that's in there as well. So go for roasting. And with that, beets actually need acid to really kind of amplify their flavor, because they have sort of, like I'll say again, that earthiness to them. Red beets, more earthy than your golden beets are, right? So if you find a beautiful golden, or the candy cane ones you can find at specialty stores, those are a little bit sweeter and they add a little bit more variety to them. But beets are uber healthy for you. They add a lot of nutrients to your diet that's missing this time of year. So those are a couple of my favorites. But there's one in particular that I feel is like the Peggy, right? So if we think about the Aunt Peggy of the fall, it is a Hamilton reference. It's the fig and the pomegranate, right? So figs are typically Middle Eastern, Mediterranean, and fun fact, they're actually a flower inside out. Did you know that? Yes. So they have a short season. They're September, November. You can find them sometimes into January, but they are a fruit. And if you ever take the chance to look at a fig, you'll notice there's a little hole in the bottom. And it's not uncommon if you buy figs from a farmer. You'll see that every now and then you might find a bee or a wasp inside.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the bees and the wasp have to go inside of the fig in order to pollinate it. But the inside of that fruit is actually the flower of the fig. That's how we get that really crunchy, sort of unique texture to the fig. So it's not uncommon to see an insect in there that's pollinated the inside of it. But figs are delicious. You can eat them raw. You can put them on a salad. You can roast them. I like to kind of roast them with balsamic vinegar, or maybe grill them if you're pulling your grill out. It's still nice. You never know. It's Missouri, right? Oh, weather changes.
October is beautiful in Missouri usually.
But take a little bit of pomegranate molasses and rub it on top. It's great on bruschetta. If you're going to do an appetizer, wrap it in pancetta with a little bit of goat cheese.
Oh, now you're singing my story.
I know, right? You heard pancetta. A little bit of cured beet goes a long way with it.
Bruschetta, and I was like, oh, what?
Yeah. And then the other one is pomegranates. So pomegranates are unique in the sense that you can find pomegranate juice any time of the year. But pomegranate seeds and pomegranates, the whole fruit, they're out now. So they'll be in season until mid-January, end of February. But they're great to add as a beautiful pop of flavor on your salad, on your Brussels sprouts. If you think about what cranberry does to your plate at Thanksgiving, where it adds just this nice brightness of flavor, the pomegranate does that as well to everything that you eat. So
now Brussels sprouts are in season too, aren't they?
They are.
You know what I love is the block in Webster Groves has a side dish of Brussels sprouts that is the best Brussels sprouts. I've been on a giant Brussels sprout kick for the last couple months. I air fry them at home. They're just stellar at the block, just FYI.
That's good. But Brussels sprouts are best done roasted. I think back in the day, everything was boiled. So when you boil, the trick with Brussels sprout is not to overcook it. Because when you start to overcook the Brussels sprout, you actually start to relieve some of that acidity that's in the Brussels sprouts, which gives it that weird cabbage flavor that you can get out of it. So,
well, let's turn our sights then. So we've got all sorts of things that are still in season. You know, we touched on butternut squash. You've got Brussels sprouts and kale and beets and figs and pomegranates. Oh my! You know, the possibilities are endless. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the ubiquitous pumpkin.
Yes.
Talk to me about pumpkins. So first of all, Pumpkins have been in stores for a while. Hopefully by now we all have them on our front porch. We are all fending off the squirrels, making sure that the squirrels and raccoons are not eating our pumpkins off our front porch like I am. I'm always in the morning going out and being like, oh, they're chewing on it again. It drives me crazy. But there are multiple uses of pumpkins beyond decorating. And there's a big difference between the pumpkin that you carve with your kids and put out in the jack-o'-lantern, and the pumpkin that you buy that you might want to turn into a pie.
Right.
What's the difference?
So the pumpkin pie pumpkins are actually a lot smaller. So they're going to add a little bit more flavor. They have a little bit less seeds in them than the big, huge pumpkins do.
Are they the same breed of pumpkin, though?
There's different breeds of pumpkins. They're different. There's an actual breed of pumpkin called pumpkin pie pumpkin. Huh. There's a lot of peas in a row.
Does it come pre-spiced? Is it like a pumpkin pie spice pumpkin?
Well, it would not be on Joe Prosperi's list if it was pumpkin pie spice.
Well, it's funny because I don't like pumpkin spice lattes. Like, I'm not anti-PSLs, but like I'm not a huge pumpkin pie fan, but I love pumpkin bread, and I'll talk about that. I'll come back to that. But keep talking about pumpkins. Okay,
so here's the thing with pumpkins. When you go to pick pumpkins at the pumpkin patch, right, and you're like, well, I don't know what to pick. Let's just grab something. This is what I want. I fit in my wheelbarrow. This is what my kid can carry. Whatever you think, when you're looking for a pumpkin, you want to tap it just like you would a watermelon, right? You want to make sure that you have that nice hollow sound in there. But the other thing is to really make sure that there's no blemishes on your pumpkin. Your pumpkin is the skin of the pumpkin can start to, if it's blemished or scratched or cut, it will already start to disintegrate. It will already start to fall apart. So think about it like your skin if you cut your skin, you could get infected. The same thing with your pumpkin. So that's why if you do carve your pumpkins, you want to, dip them in a bleach solution that will prevent any of that bacteria to grow in there. It'll make it last a little bit longer. Cool. So with that, pumpkin seeds. Let's talk about it. You've taken the time.
What's the other name for pumpkin seeds?
So there's two forms of pumpkin seeds. So pumpkin seeds are the outside shell, right? So it has they're white, and that would be what you would pull out as you're digging out the guts of your pumpkin as you carve it, right? So you can roast those. Now, inside of that shell is the other form of pumpkin seed, which is known pepitas.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yes, yeah. And pepitas you'll see a lot in Mexican cuisine because pumpkins and squashes are actually native to North America. It's not something that was brought over on a ship during the Great Exploration. So it is native to us. So you'll see it in a lot of North American and South American cuisines. So they are delicious. But if you're trying to make and roast your own pumpkin seeds, there's a couple things to know to do. One, you need to clean all that gook and gack off of it, right?
You have to? I can't just throw it all on a cookie sheet and just roast it in a big pile?
I mean, you could, but I don't know if the outcome would be as delicious. So you do have to kind of go through and sort of separate it. The other big thing is allowing those pumpkin seeds to sit in a saltwater brine, right? It doesn't have to be a very long time. I'll do mine overnight, right? The longer you let it sit, the saltier they'll be. But what's happening is you're also able to kind of like hydrate the shell. You're also able to allow the salt to come in. And then you would lay it out and dry it. You want to make sure you let it dry on a paper towel. And then you roast them. Toss them in a little bit of olive oil, a little bit of pepper. You can put fun other seasonings on there too. A little chipotle powder is good on it. I've done everything bagel seasoning on my pumpkin seeds before. They're pretty delicious. I know, a little bit of garlic.
All right. So now you can buy pumpkins at the store. This is kind of like a rehash of our apple conversation from a month ago. But I think it's very similar because when, I feel like in fall, my family goes through the same journey of we're like, oh, it's apple season. We go apple picking and we pick out our apples and we go home. And then about a month later, it's pumpkin season and we're going to go to the pumpkin patch and pick out our pumpkins. So it's kind of like a dual family field trip time in the fall. Where are places to go to get pumpkins?
Well, I think the classic answer is Eckert's, right? They've got a pretty good monopoly on the apple picking and the pumpkin picking patches. So with it, they've cultivated a lot of land to be able to provide that produce. But there's a lot of really great local farmers markets that transform their market because now they don't have farmers coming in, but now they're able to transform it into a fun Halloween play place, right? So,
and that's what I always remember from Rombach's Pumpkin Patch way out in the Chesterfield Valley.
Yep.
It's not open anymore, but I think most listeners that have ever been to a pumpkin patch at all in St. Louis will remember at some point going out to Rombach's along Chesterfield Airport Road, where they kind of had the giant piles of pumpkins and the massive ones that as a small child you would sit on. Your parents would take a picture of you. The smell of kettle corn in the air, the field you could run out and pick a pumpkin. All different sizes of gourds and pumpkins and things. They had a little haunted house you could walk through. They had a little castle that was made of wood that you could climb around in tree houses and do stuff in. I remember that very vividly, and even just a couple of years ago before they closed, taking my kids out there to Rombach's. And I think there are a couple other pumpkin patches around that have similar kind of experiences, and that was where we went. But I think there are more than just Rombach's.
There are. So there's Thies, which is in the same area over there up in St. Charles, O'Fallon area. Creve Coeur. They also have one down in Creve Coeur. I know the Kirkwood Farmers Market transforms theirs to this big, huge area. They've got hay. They've got a climbing wall. They've got slides. They've got fun little tractors.
Like a big corn pool the kids can jump in.
Oh, it's
like
fantastic.
Corn kernels. And I'm like, I'm going to find corn kernels for a week in my house.
And it's fun because there's local churches, too, that will transform the front lot of their church into pumpkin patches for people to be able to come out. Webster Hills Lutheran Church, right?
Webster Hills United Methodist.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's just I always remember driving past it and being like, it's really cute. They've done a
we went
good
there
job.
last year. It was very cool. They had a neat little Photoshop area. It was pandemic pumpkin picking, so we were able to social distance a little bit better over there.
Peas in the month of
the Prosperity Pandemic Pumpkin Picking, expedition. But it was very cute and very fun. So yeah.
Well, that's fun. Now, here's one thing with pumpkins, with squashes. Your canned pumpkin is actually a mix of gourds, squashes, and pumpkins. So it's not 100% pumpkin.
Shut up.
That's true. True. There was a article that came out.
Please tell me there was a lawsuit over this.
No.
That somebody did like a genetic testing of canned pumpkin and realized that it really, kind of like the whole like urban legend of IKEA's meatballs being not really, they were horse meat or something crazy like that.
I don't think I heard that.
Oh, that's a whole thing. But IKEA meatballs are delicious, by the way. No knock on IKEA. But that in my head when you say that, I think that's like what enterprising person was like, I wonder if this canned pumpkin really is 100% pure pumpkin.
Yeah, there are lots of articles out there on canned pumpkin isn't actually pumpkin. It is a mix. It's butternut squash. So it's a mix of...
Hot dang, no wonder I like it so much.
So next time your mom makes you pumpkin bread, you could just say, this is squash bread, right? So it's a mix of winter squashes. It's a mix of gourds that are in there. It's also a little bit of pumpkin. But all of those flavors are very, very similar across the board. So
Fascinating.
So when you have a pumpkin pie, do you feel like you could call it pumpkin pie? Maybe it should be autumn pie. Right? Thanksgiving pie.
That's like sweet potato pie. Like I've never really had a good sweet potato pie.
So I'll dive in a little bit more for you. So the FDA is actually really vague on what counts as pumpkins, right? So that's how they're able to get away with.
How can you be vague on what's a pumpkin? It's orange. It has a stem. It's a pumpkin. Like how do you look at something and go, that could be a pumpkin?
Joe, that's like saying that something is of organic matter and they can take secretions from animals and say that it is inorganic matter and add it to our food for us, too.
You're talking about vanilla flavoring, aren't you?
I am.
Yes, okay. That's a whole other podcast.
That is a whole other podcast. We're making a list.
If you want to Google that, look up imitation vanilla flavoring and your world will be shocked.
And you will all of a sudden start making your own vanilla. Yeah, it was, there have been so many write-ups on the fact that canned pumpkin is a variety of different things.
So now I'm intrigued that if I were to go buy a pumpkin pie pumpkin or a pea cubed and I were to roast it and make pumpkin bread or something pumpkin that I liked using 100% authentic pumpkin, is it going to be drastically different than the canned imitation imposter pumpkin that you're telling me I've been using?
I don't know. You'll have to test and report back to us.
I will test and report back. I have always been 100% pleased with canned pumpkin, but now I feel it's like one of those things where I'm like, I've always liked vanilla ice cream, but did I not know that there was Moose Tracks ice cream? Like, you never know until you try it. So maybe if I make a pumpkin spice latte with real pumpkin pie pumpkin, I would actually like a pumpkin spice latte.
It's almost like you feel like you've been lied to your whole life, right?
It does. I feel I've been bamboozled.
Yes, I'm sorry. But if you did want to, let's talk about how to actually make your own pumpkin puree. Since now that you've broached that question.
Talk about it, and then I'm going to talk about pumpkin bread because I promised my mom that I would.
All right, so if you wanted to do it, you'd roast it just like you would your squash, right? Because they are very similar, as we've already. So 375, preheat it. You just want to cut it in half, and essentially, obviously, take out the inside seeds and a little bit of that pulp that's inside of there. And then ideally you would do it the same way. You could scoop out the interior of it and then put it in a food processor and puree it up. So you will be, I think, delighted that the flavor is going to be very unique in the sense that it's not your normal bright orange, or I don't even say it's bright. It's like autumn orange, right? It's the color that you think of when you open that can of Libby's pumpkin puree, right? Yeah. It's got that 70s orange.
It's a very unique orange.
Right. And so then
Which makes me think that they put dye in it now just to make it look more festive.
That's how you know when you have a good key lime pie. It's not bright green.
It's not green.
It's very light. Sure. Yeah. So when you do the pure, organic, natural substance, you're going to get a much different variety to it. All right, so let's talk about Mary Lou's pumpkin bread. Because I'm gonna probably request a loaf now that you've talked about it. So amazing.
If anybody wants to request a loaf, just call the station. And my mom would hate that. But so my mom's pumpkin bread. This is I've been ever since we started this podcast. I knew that I had to talk about my mom's pumpkin bread because our first episode was about food journeys, and I touched on it a little bit there, but. My mom's pumpkin bread, Mary Lou Prosperity's pumpkin bread, is a food that I have grown up with since I was a small child. And I think, there was never a birthday that went by. Even now, I, as a 39, almost 40-year-old man, still have a mother that comes by on my birthdays and brings me homemade pumpkin bread because she knows that's what I want. She knows that when I'm having a rough time with something, she says, Joey, do you need me to bring you some pumpkin bread? And just that alone makes me happy. And that in and of itself is worthwhile to me. And it's not the super advanced pumpkin bread recipe. She's not starting with, amazing pumpkin pie pumpkins that are heirloom grown and chopped and roasted at the perfect temperature and scooped out and handled with, special tools. I mean, it's a fairly straightforward pumpkin bread recipe, but it is the perfect pumpkin bread recipe. And I've paired it up against multiple recipes. I've eaten pumpkin bread from a variety of bakeries and locations around town, and many of them are very, very good and really wonderful pumpkin breads that I would eat over and over, but they're not my mom's. And because of that, I've asked her to write down her pumpkin bread recipe, and I'm going to share it on the Chew and the Lou website and on social for all of you to see. I wish I could deliver a loaf of Mary Lou Prosperity's pumpkin bread to everyone. I wish you could call the station and just order some, and we'd make it a pledge drive fundraiser maybe someday. Maybe we'll large scale operation it and make it a thing. But for now, I can at least share the recipe, because for me, when I see a pumpkin or when it comes this time of year, my mind automatically goes to my mom's going to make me some pumpkin bread.
It's laced with Mary Lou's love.
It's laced with mom love.
There you go.
There's nothing better than that.
But I'm sure it is sprinkled with cinnamon and sugar, brown sugar, and all of those delicious seasonal spices.
Again, pretty basic. It's not full of nuts. I mean, I had some pumpkin breads that had, a crust of walnuts and pistachios, or, had cream cheese frosting on them and all this kind of stuff. And that, they're great, but this is just a plain pumpkin bread that on its own just serves and hits every note that you want a pumpkin bread to hit.
I cannot wait to get a loaf.
I will
put
get
me
you
on the
a
list.
loaf. I will make it. I will make you some for the holidays, because now that I've built it up on the podcast, now I feel like I have to make it for people, because it's that good.
Well, I'm going to say that outside of making your mom's pumpkin bread or receiving that, there's some really good local places to go and eat some of these seasonal foods that we've talked about. I know I saw the other day Pastaria posted their ricotta cavatelli, and I'm just going to go ahead and read this out. The Italian in the room is already intrigued by this, right? So they made a butternut squash ragu with jalapenos and sage, pecorino and lime juice for balance, brown butter breadcrumbs, right? And then they topped it all off with whipped ricotta on top.
Oh, Lord.
I don't know about you, but that sounds delicious.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But the other great place to check out that really focuses on seasonal local cuisine would be Bulrush. Have you heard of Bulrush?
I have heard of Bulrush, and it's on my short list of places to get a reservation for. So talk to everybody about what Bulrush is and kind of what their hook is, because it's an amazing concept.
It is. So Bulrush's whole basis is around the roots of Ozark cuisine, right? So when we talk about local, when we talk about seasonal, that is their whole mission statement, right? So they found through old family journals and letters from the early 1800s, recipes from the area, and they basically built a whole restaurant based off of that, right? But not only that, but their philosophy on food is that food should be good. It should be locally sourced, and it should be, hyper seasonal. So if you're looking to go in and get peaches right now, you'll get canned peaches. You're not going to get a fresh peach off the tree or somewhere from California or Mexico flown in. Everything is here in town, sourced locally. And what I love about them is that they're also a zero waste kitchen. Yeah. So if they have food scraps, they put them in sauces. They make fermented drinks with them, vinegars. They on average they've said that they anywhere from 5 to 10 gallons of food waste a week, which is pretty phenomenal in comparison to most restaurants.
5 to 10 gallons of food waste a week.
That's a week, it? Yes.
I'm a family of 4, and I think I have 5 to 10 gallons of food waste a day, and I'm not a restaurant serving people.
Yeah. And so that is their mission. They pay their staff a fair wage. So they're built on a lot of great foundations. And so if you're looking for something seasonally, their menu isn't really posted. You can't really go online and look at their menu, right? It changes weekly based off of what's in season and what they can get. You should follow them on
Instagram, though, because they're really good about posting on Instagram what they're making.
Yes.
And what's really fascinating about Bulrush, because I follow them on Instagram, but I also follow the Missouri Department of Conservation, and I'm going somewhere with this. So the Missouri Department of Conservation does a really great job of occasionally posting videos about locally foraged foods, whether that be mushrooms that are in season, things that you can find and forage for yourself. Like recently, it was pawpaw season, and people could forage for pawpaws, which is actually the largest native fruit grown in Missouri. And they're notoriously tough to cook with or to keep long enough to cook with at a restaurant. But Bulrush cooks with them this time of year in the fall because it's local and it's delicious, actually. And so I was following them. Then the Missouri Department of Conservation did a thing on Facebook where they talked about harvesting and finding pawpaws, how to make pawpaw puree for storage. And at the same time, I saw that pawpaws were on the menu in a dessert at Bulrush at the time. So it was really interesting. I see that often a lot, that similarity between what the Department of Conservation is pushing as what is actually happening within the conservation efforts of the state and what Bulrush is serving on their menu.
Yes. So, and to clarify, this is not just a normal restaurant for you to walk into. They only offer tasting menus. So it's 7 courses. They are open Thursday through Sunday. Each meal includes a staff explanation of the food, the history, the research projects that are connected to it, and then they also have beverage pairings with it as well. And they are, they're accommodating. So if you're someone that has a sensitivity or a tolerance to something, they will accommodate that if they know ahead of time. But I think it's very unique to find a restaurant that is making so much effort to lace the hyper local, hyper seasonal ingredients, but to also include the history with it too. So it's worth checking out.
It's fine dining. I mean, you're not eating dirty foraged mushrooms.
Yes.
You're eating things that are prepared and balanced and well researched and well tested and well seasoned and well prepared.
Yes. So check them out.
That's fantastic. Well, we got a lot of things to eat in St. Louis in the fall, don't we?
We do. And not just Thanksgiving dinner. I think a lot of times we associate fall meals with Thanksgiving, right? So there's the pork will go really well with a lot of the seasonal produce that you have. Turkey's great. This is the time to really go home and make a really beautiful pot of soup.
There's a reason why we all get fat in fall.
It's sweater weather to cover up our fat rolls.
For sure.
Oh, I love it.
Well, you guys go out there, find some of those local things, whether you're foraging them or finding them at a local store. Make them, cook them, eat them, share them, love them, talk about them. But make sure that you are following us on our social channels at Chew in the Lou, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find recipes about things in this episode at chewinthelou.org. And we will talk to you again in 2 weeks.
See you guys then.
Thank you for listening to the Chew in the Lou podcast. Your hosts are Joe Prosperi
and Lydia Gwynn.
Our producer is Veronica Moheski, and this is a production of 9 PBS in St. Louis.